Puerto Ricans in the room? Hi. Full name is Carlos Alberto Rodriguez Sotorti Rivera Pagamburgo Pardo Garcia Caquillas Nazario. Or you can call me Carlos. My wife's from Sheffield, England. She still, after 18 years, doesn't know my full name, so you're off the hook. We're good. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in a very broken home. Both my parents in their second marriages. Abuse, alcoholism, infidelity. I end up in Lakeland, Florida at the age of 10. Lakeland, somebody shout out at Lakeland. What is Polk County? Wow. Puerto Rico, Lakeland. I mean, I'm in a good crowd. I knew car and house. That's the extent of my English. But thanks to Saved by the Bell, and thanks to Mrs. Strickland, who was my teacher in Lakeland, Carlton Palmer Elementary School, I started to speak English. And I married a lady from the country that invented English. So that worked out for me. But still, the brokenness came with me. And I've carried that brokenness from the abuse that I've experienced in my home. I carried it into my marriage. I carried it into my marriage in such a way that because it was not as bad as what my dad used to do, I felt really good about myself. And I became a pastor. When you're broken and you're a pastor, it's hard. And I could do this very skillfully. I could be vulnerable enough for you to say, you see, my pastor's really real, but not vulnerable enough for you to say he shouldn't pastor anybody. And that's the danger with vulnerability. And I'm so glad that there's so much content and conversation about mental health, about emotional health. But we can fall into the trap of using vulnerability as marketing and not as reality. It's when it scares the shit out of you that you know you're being vulnerable. If not, it's BS. And so I just knew how to play the game in church, how to raise my hands at the right time, how to preach a sermon that was challenging but still not offensive enough to our big donors. But at home, I was a jerk. I wasn't my dad. I could pretend enough. I could create an atmosphere of anger, and I could excuse it on my culture. We're just, look at me. We talk with our hands. Here's my British wife. She comes from a very posh family in northern England. And the first time I went to England to have a meal with what were then my future in-laws, I was lost in a sea of cutlery that I didn't know which one to use when. They bring their food to their mouth. We bring our heads to our plates, right? So, we are so completely different in every single shape or form. And I would always find an excuse, whether it was my culture, whether it's the pressure of being a pastor, whether it's all the weight that I'm carrying for all the work that we're doing that's so important and so valuable. And there was always a reason that somebody else was responsible for my behavior. And it's not until my courageous and beautiful wife said, enough, it's not good enough. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not good enough. You've heard the stories about what my dad used to do. And she's like, but I'm not married to your dad, I'm married to you. And it's not good enough. And I went through the horrible process of cancel culture. I was canceled. So I'm a fan of cancel culture because it gave me an opportunity to get out of the pretending and begin to depend. Depend on the community that now knew that Carlos has an anger problem. And he's not abusive, like those guys on TV, but he's not raising his family right. And he's not loving his wife right. And I would always then, when the mask is off, when the pretending is off, then I'm talking to my counselor. I'm like, I just want Catherine, my wife, to take at least 1% of the fault. I'll take 99%, but at least 1%. And he kept saying, it's not until you fully take responsibility. And I'm like, but I want the church, 0.2% that the church takes responsibility because they put so much pressure on me, and I've been such a good pastor, and I've been such a good leader, and I'm so committed to the work. And he's like, it's not until you take full responsibility. Now the benefit is, if we allow the process, if we allow the exposure, if we allow the walking into the light to happen, If we take off the mask of pretending, then we begin the beautiful journey of depending. On depending on my wife's grace and mercy and forgiveness, on depending on my therapist, having to see him every week and challenging me and pushing me, depending on the community that was around me that already knew, like, you're a mess. And because you're a mess, you're not going to be the leader in all these areas. And because you're a mess, you're going to sit and you're going to learn and you're going to be humbled. I like it when people say, you're so humble, but I hate being humbled. But that's the invitation of this age, of this moment, that we stop pretending and we begin to depend. In that process, as I'm kind of like, my faith is unraveling, I don't know what I believe anymore, because so much of what I preach depended on my position and not on my person. When I had to die to all those stages that I've built for myself, I would use words, really Christianese words like, we're building the kingdom of God, but really I was building Carlos's kingdom. And I'm flying and I'm traveling and I'm telling, I'm in Ukraine, I'm in Romania, I'm all over Latin America, families first, put your family first. My family's nowhere to be found. Actually happier when I was away than I was at home. And all this brokenness brought me to a place where the light could shine in and where I could do the hard work of actually not just learning 2 or 3 skills to be a little bit more calm, but actually to break down all the internal culture that gave me permission. It's okay to be broken. It's not okay to break. And that's what I had to learn. And in that journey, as I'm kind of like being liberated on the inside and I'm learning new skills for joy and for peace and for hope in my own life, as I'm deconstructing all these things that I believed about God, about people, about church, about myself, then I started to write this book called Drop the Stones. And the book started to kind of gain traction and people are like excited about it, and my publisher's doing this big book release. Barnes & Nobles in Durham, North Carolina. And I walked into the Barnes & Nobles and my kids are taking photos because it's my face with the book right on this big banner. And I'm feeling so good about it. I'm starting to fall back into the trap. Like somehow it's because of me. Like somehow it's not the community, it's not the people around me. It's because, yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing so good. But it's for Jesus, but I'm doing good. That very night, as I'm reading chapter 4 of my book in a very deep voice to this crowd that has gathered, and there's a line and I'm signing my book. That's September 20th, 2017, as Hurricane Maria is absolutely destroying our island. It was heartbreaking, but I had book signings to go to. And I had my publisher had lined up all these events and all these opportunities. And Carlos, this book is going to do so well. And I'm like, man, we're gonna 10% of the proceeds of the book is gonna go to Puerto Rico, and we're gonna find a reason to help. But but my kingdom, but my place, but my identity that was dependent on this platform, and then I lost that platform, and I'm just gonna build a better platform. A friend of mine called 3 days after Maria. His name is Carl. He used to be a missionary in the Middle East for 25 years, a good man who became a really good friend. I didn't pick up the phone. He left me a voice message. He's like, Carlos, don't you dare, beep, 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 beep. He's a good friend, so he has permission. Don't you dare waste your life being a talking head. Don't you dare waste your life talking about the things that you would want to see others do, but not do them yourselves. Don't you dare, my friend, don't you dare. He kept saying, don't you dare. He didn't have to explain himself. I knew what he was talking about. And so I had to talk with my publishers, and I decided, okay, let's do a break and let me go to Puerto Rico. I need to go to Puerto Rico. All these people that knew me as a Puerto Rican, because I'm very proud to be Puerto Rican, and you need to come to Puerto Rico. And I promise you I'll feed you rice and beans with plantains and avocado. Actually, there's this thing called pastelón, which is a lasagna, but instead of using pasta as the layers, you use fried plantains as the layers. We have avocados the size of your kids' heads. I'm not even exaggerating. But we go to Puerto Rico as our first trip. Okay, I'm still thinking about my freaking platform. I'm still thinking about how this is going to look and how am I going to present this in a way that's going to benefit me. And I found myself falling into a new trap. And it's the trap of turning those who are marginalized into a prop for my activism. And I found myself using those who were broken and hurt and in distraught and finding a way for them to benefit me and how I look. And this is, any The Office fans around here? Anybody watch The Office? I realize how much sometimes in the church and in the nonprofit world, we're Michael Scott, world's greatest boss. We're such a great family, and we're telling everybody what a great family this is, while the employees are like, we're just here for the paycheck. Like, you're not that great at all. And we have no self-awareness. And I'm so grateful for my family, for my wife, for my community that helps me stay self-aware. I fall over and over again into the trap of believing that just because I'm in proximity, which used to be the title of my book, and as I was writing it, I've changed it. I actually lied to myself thinking that proximity was enough. But then I realized I was getting close enough to people so I could just step a little bit ahead. And I was using their shoulders for me to look just a little bit better. Because really, I'm just so broken and so little on the inside, and I feel so insecure that I just have to find a way for everybody else's story to be my story. And for everybody else's narrative to benefit my narrative. And I don't blame me, and I don't blame you either, if that's part of the difficulty on the inside. As you're building platform, as you're creating something new, as you're starting something that's exciting and meaningful and necessary. It's not hard to fall into the thing that I'm the protagonist. I mean, every movie is about the protagonist. And every movie is kind of telling you, that hero, that woman, that's you. And you're watching Marvel movies, and every superhero, and there's enough brokenness so you feel connected, but at the end, wow, they're the champions. I didn't realize that the same thing, Thanos was thinking the same thing, that he's the champion of the universe, and he's just got to be bad enough, to correct. But if we fall into the trap of not being self-aware, of not giving access to others to your true brokenness, not the one that makes you feel or the one that makes you appear approachable, but the one that's scary, the one that actually needs healing, the one that actually needs time and work and intentionality, the one that in blood and sweat and tears and in community, that kind of a healing. So I started going to Puerto Rico, and in the going and in the serving, I started to meet these people, and they stopped being a narrative that served me, and they became names and faces, and they became family and friends. There's this lady called Milagros, and Milagros, man, I love Milagros, and her name means miracles. Literally, Milagros means miracles. I went to Milagros' house 3 weeks after Maria. We were the second flight from Delta that flew into San Juan. Delta was gracious to I'm all about Delta, Atlanta, Delta. I'm like, they hooked us up with space to take water filters and help and medicine. And we're in Puerto Rico, and we're going from home to home. There's no telephone signal. There's no electricity. There's no running water. So we're doing water filters. We're working with a team of doctors and taking them literally old school, like going door by door, knocking on doors. What do you need? Here's this lady, Milagros. She had surgery. Her leg was amputated because of diabetes 3 days before Maria. We didn't know it was going to be that bad. And it's been amputated, and it's infected, and the smell and the pain. There's no medicine coming. There's no help coming. We get into Milagros' house, and I in that specific day that we were visiting, we had the water filters, we had some medicine, but we didn't have any doctors with us, and I just don't know what to do. And again, why I'm kind of denying and dying to that whole thing of proximity, because what we need is not proximity, it's presence. It's in presence where you weep with those who weep, and you rejoice with those who rejoice. In proximity, you feel close enough that you feel like you're involved. You feel like you know. And it's so bizarre how social media, like you can literally be on Twitter and wow, there's an issue in somewhere in the world and you press retweet. Man, it feels good. I gave my platform to this cause. And even in the proximity of social media, we lie to ourselves. But it was in Milagros' house where there was no miracle happening, where I discovered the power of presence. As she's laying on her bed, they put one of these mosquito nets on top of her bed. She's crying. The smell is strong. The family is desperate. Like she's in the second level. There's still water in the first level. It's an absolute mess. And I'm honestly, right, you're seeing me already. I got movement in my life, right? It's hard to stop. And I'm just like, what am I doing? Milagros. And I open up the little mosquito net, and I got into bed with her, and I asked her, what's your favorite corito? Corito is like old school, like Christian song back in the day, a hymn, an old hymn, that's the word. We call it corito, it's nicer than hymn. It's cuter. And I'm saying, what's your favorite corito, Milagro? And she's like, this one. I'm like, I know that one, my grandpa taught me that one. And I laid next to her, and I'm stroking her, and I'm singing this song, and I knew that day that it was not about me. That I want to be healed, and I want to be whole, and I don't want my brokenness to hurt others, but not for the sake of me. If that's why we're here, if that's why we're building, if that's why we're healing, if it's just for the sake of us, it will never be enough. You will never be truly satisfied. You will never truly know the joy of serving, of surrender, of giving. It truly is better to give than to receive. Now, the healing is the place where you can actually give, not for your own sake, but for the sake of somebody else. That's why you can't skip that part of the journey. But when you get to a place and you meet the ones that are broken, that are hurting, that are lonely, that have been marginalized, and you know that in that space, as you're starting your nonprofit, I beg you, do not turn the vulnerable into a way to monetize your activism. Let them be the story that needs to be highlighted. Let them be the heroes of the narratives, because they are. Milagros went through an amputation and a hurricane and earthquakes and a complete unraveling of our political system and pandemic right now. She's the hero of my story. I speak her name because she is the miracle. And her presence and her resilience is what brings me here. I have another lady. Her name is Victoria. Victory. These Puerto Ricans with their wonderful names. And Victoria was known all over town. She's the witch doctor. I go to Victoria's house. We were fortunate enough, as we're selling apparel, I started a thing called the Happy Givers. You can visit us, thehappygivers.com. We sell shirts and mugs and hats and all that stuff. We make it out of Puerto Rico now, which is very exciting. And 100% of the profits of what we sell pays for the new homes and the positional beds. And now we have a social kitchen, and we're feeding more than 57 families every week. And she's part of that crew where we're feeding them, but not just a plate of food, dignity. Like, how do you like your beans cooked? Which is really important in Puerto Rico. And do you have a table where you can sit with dignity to eat that food? Do you have a microwave that's working so you can reheat that food if you don't finish it? Do you have a space where you can sit with others and others can know your name? I went to Victoria's house, and Victoria looked at me and she went, "Ooh, you're a Leo." I was like, oh man, she's right. I am a Leo. She's like, yeah, I love Leos. She's my mom now. And she's the overcomer. This woman has a PhD in philosophy of the University of Puerto Rico. She is a hoarder. And she doesn't mind me telling you this because I've asked her permission, because she's my mama in Vega Alta, Puerto Rico. But the hoarding has become a way because we've lost so much in the last 4 years as a nation, as an island, as a people. We've lost so much, and so much has been taken that the keeping has been a way to hold on to the story and the history and the family member that doesn't visit anymore. And it's in that place that I know it's her. I don't want to be in proximity to pain. I don't want to be in proximity to brokenness so I can find a way to make it my narrative. I want to be in the presence of tears and anger and anguish so that it become my tears and my anger and my anguish. Because charity is not going to fix what policy created. And there's enough policies in this world that are against communities like my community. Puerto Rico is an American territory, even though I get to fly to Atlanta. Even in Atlanta, I can't vote for the president. We are taxed but not represented. We are second-class citizens to your nation. We are a colony of the United States of America. And our people have paid a price and continue to pay a price. And for communities like mine and the different communities that you're deciding I'm going to serve, I'm going to love, I'm going to be there, do not turn us into props. Allow us to be the heroes that can change you. I love you guys.